Thanks everyone to join us on this Fliplet webinar. We are today going to talk about our new code library, how to easily enhance your apps with custom features. Please keep your mics off and also keep your cameras off, please. We will be recording this session, and anyone that has signed up will be getting the link for this recording after we're done. So for the sake of the recording, please keep the mics off and cameras off. Just before we get started, just going to give you a quick introduction to your speakers today. It will be Brett Johnson and myself, Joe Gustafson, who will be taking you through the session today. Brett is our customer success person for North America, and I work with our UK and EU clients. If any of you are existing clients, you've probably been talking to us before. We're also constantly on the live chat, so hello to anyone that's been talking to us previously. And for today's agenda, we are, as you can see, going through quite a lot of different items. Just to let you know, we're going to have a mix of a presentation and part live demo. So today we're going to run through and look at what is the code library. We're going to look at who can use the code library, so who's it actually for and why you would use it. Then we're going to look at some more practical items around like how you can find the code library, how you can actually read it, and how to put code into your app. And then we're going to have some further live demos where we're actually showing you how to use a couple of the snippets that we have. In the end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So during the webinar, feel free to use the chat function in Zoom to post any questions to us. You can send them at any time, and what we'll do is we'll just answer them in bulk towards the end. So yeah, feel free to send them across as soon as they kind of pop into your head. And that's it in terms of the agenda. Now let's get started. So first we're going to take a quick look at what actually is the code library. And so the code library is a library of written snippets that we have collated, and a lot of these items are actually things that we've been using internally for a long time. And what we wanted to do is find a way for us to share these with all of our clients and users so that you guys can use them to enhance your app without our help. So any Fliplet app always have the capability of adding your own HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in them. What this means is that you can use our prefab app templates and screen templates. And then if you wanted to, and if you have the capability, you can add any of your own custom code on top of it to really kind of enhance and customize your apps. What we want to do with the code library is really kind of make it a really powerful tool for anyone to customize your apps, even without kind of having a lot of experience with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to talk a little bit later on who this is actually for, but generally anyone that's a Fliplet Studio user will be able to use this. And as we mentioned, the snippets and the reason and the purpose of the code library is really for you to enhance your Fliplet apps. There's two main ways that you can use it. One of them is to put it on top of and extend your existing components and features. And one of the items that you can do is actually create custom features completely from code. In general, we would recommend that you build out most of the apps using the prefab components, mainly because it is a really quick thing to do. Using one of our templates means that you get an app that's already, let's say, 80 to 90% pre-configured for you. And then what you can do is take the rest of the 20 to 10%, customize it with your own content, data, and then if you wanted to, use the code library to enhance them even more on top of that. So for example, if you're familiar with some of the components in Fliplet, perhaps in your app you already have a form, or maybe you have a list from data source. There's quite a lot of snippets in the code library to kind of explain how you can really add a little bit of code on top of them to customize them and enhance them to be a bit more specific for your use case. So that's how you can enhance capabilities of existing components and apps. Now, to add a new feature completely from code, again, using the code library, it means that you don't have to be a developer to be able to do this. We have in our code snippets lots of kind of text to explain how you can use it, and we've got instructions of what you need to change and so on. So if you, for example, have a feature that we don't have as a standard, there's nothing that you can kind of drag and drop within the Fliplet Studio, there might be something in the code library that you can use. and you can just put a bit of code in there and you've got a completely new feature. For example, imagine you want to have something like a pop-up in your app. You want that to kind of appear on one of your screens. It's not something that we have as standard, but it's pretty simple to do with just a small snippet of code. And that's the kind of thing that you can do using the code library. So who's the code library actually for? We have tried to make it as simple as possible. And so I would actually say that anyone that has any experience using the Fliplet Studio will be able to use the code library. If you're familiar with the types of components that Fliplet offers and you have no problem kind of following simple instructions, then it will be pretty straightforward. We're going to show you a little bit later on during the webinar exactly how you can use the instructions and how you can read the snippets to make sure that it's easy for you to add them onto your apps without kind of being a developer or having any existing knowledge of HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So if you're an experienced Fliplet Studio user, you will be able to use the code library. Similarly, if you're a spreadsheet lover, so maybe you're someone who just spent a lot of time working in Excel and you're very used to kind of working with different types of formulas, that's basically what JavaScript is, especially if you're playing around with simple JavaScript. It's just different variations of formulas. Again, if you have experience with spreadsheets and you know how to change the formulas to work with your data in different scenarios, then you'll find the code library really easy to use. Same if you find that you kind of categorize yourself as a bit of a geek and a hacker, then again, the code library is going to be really simple for you to use because you'll recognize a lot of the terminology that we're using. On the flip side of that, obviously, if you are a website developer or a professional app developer, so you already know how to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then you can use the code library without any problems. You don't necessarily need to because you can go in directly in the developer options to add your code, but I think the code library really kind of works as a way for you to explore the different capabilities, and it just helps you get started really quickly without you having to figure everything out on your own. And so why would you use the code library? There's quite a few different reasons to use it. I mean, first of all, we would always recommend that it's a great idea to kind of explore capabilities and get some inspiration of what you can do. If you're using one of our app templates to get started and you're looking at it, but you're not really sure how you can take it further and really kind of customize it to fit your need and your purpose, the code library can be a really good place for you to just explore to see what capabilities that you can add on top of the existing features. Just like we're using app templates to give you inspiration about specific app ideas, the code library is there to kind of help you more around the features and how you can enhance it. It also is a really good place to learn how you can use code in Fliplet apps. So as I explained already, all of the snippets will have a bit of an explanation of how you can use it, what it is that you actually need to change in the snippet to make it work for your use case. So it's a really good place to just go to explore if you want to learn more about how you can maybe use custom code in your app and just explore more about how that all works. It's also really good if you have, for any reason, wanting to extend any of the prefab components. The code library is really there to kind of help you do it, especially for those of you that don't necessarily have developer capabilities or developer options within your organization. Then using something like the code library actually allows you to do a lot more advanced items without having those knowledge. You can also then, as we see, customize and include additional features in the app. As we explained, you can build them up from scratch using the custom code options. And that's it as a bit of a basic overview of what the code library is. I'm now going to hand over to Brett to give you a bit more of a look into what the code library actually looks like.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe. Let me go ahead and share my screen and I'll take over. All right, let me full screen that. Okay, so I'm going to go into how do I find the code library first. So there are several places we've added it to make it really easy. Inside Fliplet Studio, if you click the blue help button at the very bottom right, on the left-hand side here, you have basically 4 options. The help videos, which are more basic introductory videos on how to use Fliplet Studio. The live chat, which Joe mentioned is usually me or her. And then the code library / API. So we used to have developer documentation here. That's more of an advanced level. That's you'd really need to be experienced with JavaScript to use that. But this link is going to take you to both the code library and the API developer documentation. The next section is inside the actual developer options. This is where you are meant to actually add the code for Fliplet Studio. It is the second option from the bottom on this right-hand menu here. You have two places. Well, you have inside the developer options, you have docs/API again, same link in the upper right. And then we've added a menu item at the very bottom, which also takes you to the code library. And when you're taken to the code library, it's just a website. You can also just type in the URL, code.fliplet.com. This is what you'll see. Again, on the left-hand side, we have our general basic intro to Fliplet help tutorials. In the center, we have the code library, which we're going through today. And then on the right-hand side, we have the developer documentation and API information. Again, that's a little bit more technical. You'd probably want JavaScript experience to get into that. All right, so how do we actually read the code library? Well, first off, when you go into the code library, you can search, you can filter, or you can just browse through the different articles we have. They're broken down into a handful of different categories based on what the code is meant to do. And we'll go through a handful of examples. An article itself, so this one is in the data storage and retrieval section. You can see we have a title, we have prerequisites, so that's you're meant to do something before you actually read this article or use the code. The actual information about the code itself, we have, explanatory text, and then we have a code snippet. So it's all contained inside this kind of dark purple box. It tells you the type of code you're supposed to be using. So this is all JavaScript, and then there's a copy button that makes it very easy to copy it across and actually put it into your app. So it's really best to go through all of this when we actually show the examples, and we'll be sure to do that. So how do you actually put code in your app? As I mentioned, you go into the code library, you find the snippet you want, and you just click that button in the upper right, and it will copy all of that to your clipboard in your operating system. You'll go into Fliplet Studio, the developer options. Again, it's the second button from the bottom on the very far right-hand side. There's two places to put code, really. Most of the time, our documentation is built around screen JavaScript. So you can see there's a tab for this screen and for global. Global is going to affect your whole app. The screen is focused on the specific screen you're looking at. So first, make sure that you are, of course, selecting the screen from the left-hand menu that you want to be adding code to. And then, the code snippet, as I said, will say whether it's JavaScript or CSS. I don't think we have any HTML examples, but we may add those in. Most of the time, it's going to be JavaScript, so you'll just go to that tab. And then you'll just paste the code in. Now, it's also important to make note of any comments. There's typically two reasons why we have comments. And if you're not a developer, you can see it's just kind of this orange section here. Basically, this is not code. Nothing is happening because of these double lines. Make sure not to change those. This is just text meant to help you explain. And the articles themselves give a great general overview for what the code is doing, but we may want to very specifically tell you this is what this line of code does. So that's why we use comments sometimes. The other reason we use comments is to tell you to change something. Sometimes we have an example that you have to change. We know it will not work in your app until you change a couple different things. So with those changes, they are sometimes variable names. We'll go through those in an example. Field names, data source names, and IDs. So when we write an example, we don't know necessarily what you've used as a form field, or we don't know your data source ID. You have to get those and put those in. And then lastly, the last thing you want to do anytime you're putting code into your app is to test. And the easiest way to do that in Fliplet Studio is to jump into preview mode. Again, we'll show that in the examples shortly. So what is included in the code library? Joe and I have been talking about some ways you can use it and generally, what you can get, but there's some very specific things and different categories that we wanted to go through. So the first are triggers. So these are things like when a user clicks on something or taps on something, when the screen actually loads, or when a user submits a form. There's a handful of other examples, but basically this code doesn't necessarily do anything. It's just creating, kind of grabbing that instance of, okay, when someone does something, now go ahead and do, typically these are paired together in action. So the triggers and actions are separate filters that you can search for different articles in the code library. And actions, again, typically are built inside of triggers. I'll show you an example of that shortly. But the actions are going to actually do something. So when a user taps on the app, you get the trigger, and then you can load dynamic content. You can change the style, change the color. We'll have an example shortly that we're actually going to display a form field that was previously hidden. Or you can do different animations or movement of things inside your app. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the live demo. So I have two links to articles here. This is a trigger and this is an action. I wanted to jump through both of these really quickly. So we have the on form field update trigger. Basically, I'm going to use two examples here to show you we'll have a field that's hidden inside of a form, and when a user taps on another form field, it will show that field. That example will become more clear in a little bit. But basically, again, just to give you a more concrete example, this is explaining kind of what exactly happens. Basically, the code is when the form is loaded, and then when someone actually changes this specific field, let's do something. And you can see there's nothing that's actually done. We just have a lot of comments in here that say, okay, this is where you add something to be done. So again, the trigger by itself isn't really going to do anything. You'd have to add your own code. But the second example we have is probably a little bit better because it integrates both a trigger and an action. So this is the example we'll show today. It's showing or hiding a form question. And again, it's specified under the actions part of the code, but in the example below, we actually have a trigger around it as well. So this is basically saying, you know, this is how you hide a field, this is how you show a field, and this is how you switch in between showing and hiding. Our example today is going to be around two form questions. So the first question is going to be, what's your favorite color? There's a multiple select. And then if you select blue, it will pop up a second question that says, well, what specific type of blue? I know that's a very basic example, but it shows you what you can do. So again, we're using a trigger here. We're getting the form, and then we're automatically hiding the question. And then the trigger of when the first question is changed, do something else. So again, I'm just going to copy the code and show you exactly how we use this in Studio. So again, we're using the JavaScript. I'm just going to hit the copy code button, and I'm going to go into Fliplet Studio. Now again, I have my screen with a form. I have two form questions. What's your favorite color? And then what type of blue? Now obviously, I don't want what type of blue to always show. I only want that to show when someone selects blue. Two things to note before I actually paste in the code. You need to be sure to grab the field name. So you can see my label is what's your favorite color. That's what the user sees. But the variable we're going to be referring to in code is the field name. So I have field 1 for the first one and field 2 for the second one. So that's the exact name I need to use in my code to make it work properly for my specific form. So if I go into the developer options, it's going to default to this screen. And I just need to change over to the JavaScript. I don't have any custom code in here yet, so I'm just going to paste what I had copied before. And you can see here, it's telling me exactly what we're doing. So hide the blue type question. So instead of it being question 2, I need to set that to field 2. And then when user selects a color, do some other stuff. So I need to change, again, these variables. Question 1 needs to be field 1. The value is blue, so when this value equals blue, you know, show question 2, otherwise keep it hidden. So I need to, again, change this back to field 2. And it's that simple. You just have to change the variable names, and now all of this should work. I need to make sure to always hit save and run at the bottom. And now you can see even in this view that my second question is hidden. But again, to actually test it, you need to jump into preview mode. I can see what's your favorite color. If I select red, green, or purple, nothing happens. If I select blue, it now shows my second question because it's looking for when the user selects blue, do this action. And then I can select the other option and submit. But again, if I change back to another color, it's actually going to hide it again. So it toggles back and forth between showing or hiding that question, whether this value equals blue. And every time I do a click, it's checking that. Okay. So that's our first very simple example. The other examples I wanted to talk about can be a little bit more advanced. We're going to be talking about data sources and specifically the list from data source component in Fliplet. So data manipulation is one of the filters we have in the code library where you can get or set data. You can edit, sort, and filter, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today, actually filtering out certain data from view. And then you can integrate with an API or third-party databases. Again, there are some other things you can use, such as Google Maps and other integrations you can put in JavaScript. And then there's also checks and conditions. I don't think we're going to be using this in an example today, but typically the most common one we do is look at a user's email. And there's a specific article about that. But that's really useful to, for example, return only my data. So if I've added in, say, a list of contacts, I need to manipulate the data to filter where my email is added in. So I need to check my email and then filter out the information. And you can also do simple math, like if A is greater than B. We are kind of doing this in some way. We're comparing a date field, whether it's greater than or equal to today. It's done in a little bit different way, but again, I'll show you that example. Okay, so again, we're going to be going into a list from data source component, specifically in Fliplet, and we're going to be filtering it based on a specific date. So in my example, we're going to have a news feed, and it's going to be called Today's News. And we want to make sure that even though we have a record of news from past days, that we only see news from today. So we're going to have a very simple bit of code. But I want to explain here first before I copy it that we are looking at basically this section right here says GTE, greater than or equal to. And the article kind of explains this here. We can use different examples if you want to get something less than today. You can also use something more like look at things from the start of the week. We use something called moment.js, and there's a link to the library here. That library is included by default in Fliplet, but you may need a little bit of JavaScript knowledge to kind of understand it, but basically it's just helping us format dates. And I'll show you that example. Again, here we'll copy the JavaScript, go back to Fliplet Studio, back into edit mode. I'll use my second example here. So I have a separate screen that again has a list from data source. I have 3 articles in here, one from today, another from today, and one from earlier this week. And since this is called Today's News, I want to hide the one that's from earlier this week. So the list from data source component in Fliplet does have a lot of options for you to be able to sort things and filter things. So I'm sorting by date, but there's not an easy way for me to filter out things before today because we don't have a way, unless we use code, to figure out what today is. Basically, every time the user loads the screen, we need to use the moment JavaScript library to create a new date and set that to today. So I'll show you that example. So if we again go into the developer options, go to JavaScript and paste the code I've copied. This is very simple. There's only a few lines here, but basically we're saying before we load this data from the screen, we're going to change the query of the information that we get. So we're going to look at where the date this field needs to match what I have in my data source. So if I go to my data source and I go to news, you can see I have a date column. So I could have this column be whatever I want. I need to make sure, again, that the variable matches. And we can see the comment here says, change the date to match the column in your data source. So this has to be exactly what I have in my data source. The rest of this is that moment JavaScript. So like I said, basically, we're making a date for today. We're formatting it such that it is matching the data I have, so year, month, day. And then we're comparing that the data we're getting, the date is greater than or equal to the moment we just created, which is today, right now. So there's nothing I have to change in this code. Again, if I've matched this field, there's nothing more I have to do. But the article does have other examples of, again, potentially comparing data to the start of the week or having things be less than today. But if I save and run this, and again, I jump to preview, this very simple example has now completely excluded the older article from earlier this week. So I only have the 2 articles that have the date field of today. There's no way to access that other article. It's completely hidden from view for the user. It still obviously exists in my data source. I'm just filtering it on this screen so that users don't see that. And again, that can be really useful. There are other examples of potentially comparing data to a user's email so that they only see their own data, and different examples like that. Okay, and I think that is it for my demo. We'll switch back over to Jo for her demo.
Great, thanks, Brett. I'm just going to start sharing my screen again. And we're now going to take a look at some appearance customizations. And so when you are creating an app in the Fliplet Studio, we have something that we call the appearance. The appearance is how you're setting the design and the look and feel of your app. Now, what that means is that they come, our components in our apps come with a preset number of options for the appearance. What you can do using some custom CSS, so Brett was showing you quite a lot about JavaScript, we're now going to look at some CSS. What you can do with CSS is actually overwrite any of the custom Fliplet styles and therefore kind of take your designs and go a bit further than the standard options. So what we're actually going to do is we are going to look at a bit of a live demo. So I'm going to click this link and it's going to take us to our code library. And you can see we've got 3 options here for what you can do specifically around the appearance. We've got appearances selected here in our category. So you can, for example, custom style a specific component. You can add a class or ID to a component, and you can custom style multiple components. Now for the demo today, we're actually going to take a look at this first one, which is custom styling a specific component. So this article actually has quite a long and detailed description. What it actually does, it explains a lot to you about how you can use CSS, how, for those of you who necessarily doesn't have experience with CSS, it also explains to you how you can find the HTML that you need to target to get your styles to apply to the correct place in the app. We can scroll down and you can kind of have a bit of a look at this, but what we're actually going to do is we're going to move into the Fliplet Studio and we're going to do a bit of a demo about this. Now I've got my Fliplet Studio open here and I've got my app. I'm going to close my developer options and we can take a quick look at what we see here. So in order to be able to change the CSS of any item, I need to first know the HTML class that we need to target to kind of say, I want this style to attach to this feature. If you have experience with HTML and CSS, you might already know the HTML class that you want to target. And then what you can actually do is you can open the developer options. You can go into the CSS and you can actually type it out straight away. Now, for example, I know that this title here, I know this is a heading 1, so I know it's an H1. If I know this, I can actually type it out straight away. So I can type H1, I can put my open brackets in here and I can completely just write this myself. So I'm gonna write color and I'm gonna write red. If I then click save and run, we should be able to see that the color of this is updated to red because I know this is a heading 1. So this is how, if you already have a little bit of knowledge around CSS and HTML, you can customize this completely on your own, but you don't actually need to have any knowledge around HTML or CSS to kind of figure out how to customize this. What you can actually do, and I'm going to move into preview for this, is if you want to customize any of the Fliplet pre-built components, even if you have HTML knowledge, you might not know the correct class you need to apply the custom CSS. So what we can do to find that HTML is use our Chrome inspector tool to find the correct HTML class and then apply our CSS. To do that, make sure you're always in preview mode. And then what we can do for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to hide this top bar menu. Now, this is something that we do in a lot of our apps. It's a really good example to show you. And it's something that you would do quite often on a login screen like this, mainly because if you have a login screen in your app, you might not want to allow the user to navigate away. So you want to hide the back arrow, you want to hide the hamburger menu. And because we already have a title here, we can also hide the title. It's just not necessary. So in order for me to find the correct class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click at the top bar and I'm going to select inspect. What this does, it opens up my console on the side, and what we can see here is you've got two sections. One of them is highlighting all of the HTML on the screen. So you can see if I'm highlighting or hovering over this, it's actually hovering or highlighting the exact section on the screen where I am. And then below this line here, we've got all of the different styles. So the style is the CSS of the app. So what I'm going to do first of all is make sure in my HTML I'm finding the correct class that I want to use. Now, if I were to wanted to hide only the title, I could click here and I could hide it. But what I actually want is I want the whole top bar. So I know I want actually this section up here, which is at the top. Then what I'm going to do to be able to test my CSS, so what I can actually do is I can type it out directly in my console and therefore update the app only in my browser. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. I'm going to click here and I'm going to write display none. And you can see I know that this is the correct CSS that I need to use to hide something, but it also gives you options. So if you start typing here, you can see all of the different options of the CSS that you have. So this just gives you a really good experience with it. Even if you don't necessarily know the correct CSS that you want to use, you can explore it. I would also recommend if you don't really know the CSS that you need, you can always do a quick Google search for how to hide something in CSS, and you can find the correct code that you actually need. So you can see that this is updated in my app here. I've hidden the top bar menu. Now, because I've done this only in my console, if I refresh the screen, the top bar will come back because I've only changed it specifically in my browser. This hasn't changed it for anyone else. So what I need to do is, now that I know the correct class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste this into my developer options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, go back into edit. And now that this reloads again, you should see that the top bar is back. There we go. I'm going to open my developer options. I'm going to go into CSS and I'm going to paste my class, which always starts with a full stop in the beginning. And then I'm going to write display. And I'm going to write none, which just says hide it. So display nothing. And then if I click save and run, this should update. Now, this is how you can quickly go and find the class of an HTML element, apply some CSS, and then successfully customize your app when it comes to the appearance. The really good thing about doing this is once you've kind of found the class of something once, you can reuse this across any screen if you wanted to. Or let's say for some reason I wanted to hide the top bar on all of my apps, I could actually copy this and even put it in the global CSS of my app, and that would hide it on all of the screens in my app. So that's how you can customize the appearance of your app using the code library and some custom CSS. Now, let's quickly just go back to our presentation. We have a couple of more slides to run through, and then we should be finished for today, so we can go into the Q&A. So on top of what you've already seen that the code library includes, we have a couple of other features that we don't really have a demo for you today, but if you feel like intrigued, you can go in and have a bit of an explore. So for example, you have a way to create custom analytics events. The Fliplet standard analytics comes with quite a lot of different items that we are tracking. However, let's say you created a custom feature in your app. Our analytics wouldn't necessarily track that automatically, but in the code library, it will explain to you how you can create custom analytics events so we can track all of the events that is happening in your app, even the custom ones that you've created yourself. We also have a barcode scanner. A barcode scanner, we have kind of two things that you can do with them. One is that you can have an app that actually generates automatically barcodes for you, which then you can use your app to scan. So for example, we are currently using a barcode scanner in one of our app templates to allow you to check in when you scan a barcode. What this means is in your app, if you put a little snippet of JavaScript, you can actually allow the mobile device to open up the camera. The user can then point the camera at a barcode and that can successfully scan it and then sign them in or check them in if they're at an event or something like that. It's a really powerful feature and it's very, very simple to set it up in your app using the code library. The code library has been launched quite recently, so we're constantly working on it and updating it with new snippets and new features. Some of the items that we have coming soon, you can see here, we've got our Fliplet helpers. Fliplet helpers will be kind of allowing you to use shortcodes to create your own components. For those of you that have used things like handlebars before, which is just like a little piece of HTML, will kind of find this quite useful when we have it live, and it will allow you to do some more kind of advanced features such as decision trees and maybe trainings and microlearning with results. We're also working on some integrations at the moment. For example, we're going to have integrations with PayPal and Zapier. We're also working on adding OAuth 2. And as I mentioned, we continue kind of adding in and growing this library. So if you guys ever have any suggestions or questions about what we can do, it might be that it's just something that we haven't gotten around to adding to the library yet. So do feel free to reach out to us with suggestions and questions if you have them. And I think that was everything for this presentation today. We're now going to go into a bit of a Q&A. If any of you kind of joined later in the webinar, we've kind of mentioned you can ask any questions using the chat. So feel free to kind of send them in now if you have any questions. Brett, do we have any questions to start with?
Well, yeah, we had two. You already answered one, which again, as you said, just to reiterate, if anyone has suggestions or is looking for a code snippet that doesn't exist, just ask us, reach out in live chat or email Joe or I, and we can help you out there and potentially, add a new article. As she said, we're always growing the code library. The second question is, can I add in code snippets I find elsewhere? So no part of Fliplet is restricted to only use Fliplet code or anything like that. When we say JavaScript and CSS, you can use any JavaScript or CSS you find. As I mentioned before, we have some examples of integrating with Google Maps or other third-party systems. You're going to be using their code. So if you find code online that has a bunch of JavaScript, you could potentially throw that into a Fliplet app. Now, it's probably going to take quite a bit of troubleshooting and testing to get to work, and we won't necessarily, understand how to help you with that. But you can absolutely add in any JavaScript or CSS that you find.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add on top of that as well, when we're kind of creating custom features, or even when we're using our code snippets in Fliplet, quite a lot of them are taken from external places on the internet. So you can just kind of Google for a lot of things and find what you're looking for. I think the code snippets that we've initially put into the code library are things that we're doing on a daily basis, and we wanted to share them with all of our users just to make sure that you guys can add the same kind of value to your apps as we're doing on a daily basis. But this, as Brett mentioned, absolutely no limitations. And if you find an online library, feel free to use it. As Brett mentioned, there might just be, if you do need help with it and we don't have experience with it, that might take a little bit longer for us to kind of help you out.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I don't think we had any other questions. I haven't seen anything else come through.
Great, then thanks so much for joining, everyone. Before you all kind of sign off, I just wanted to mention quickly that we have another couple of upcoming webinars. So on the 24th of June at 3 p.m. UK time and 10 a.m. Eastern time, we've got a webinar about maximizing marketing and thought leadership with apps. Also on the 7th of July, we've got at 4 p.m. UK and 11 a.m. Eastern time, we've got increasing the reach of legal tech through integrations. So you see the URL here where you can sign up. Please feel free to do so if you would like to attend. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this webinar today. We've definitely enjoyed having you on here, and we'll be following up with a recording as soon as we can.